All right, let's jump into our deep dive today. And we are going to be tackling this sermon, Trad Dads, from Pastor Luke Pierson at Apologia Church. This was streamed on February 23rd, 2025. The title itself, I think, is a pretty big conversation starter, right?
Absolutely. It really is. And it immediately makes me think about that trad wife concept, which I think has become, kind of a loaded term these days. I mean, it started out, initially, I think, with some positive connotations, but then kind of morphed into this fashion trend almost, and then even a negative label for, people outside of that movement. So it is kind of interesting to see Pastor Pierson trying to reclaim the trad dad title here and really root it in this vision of, biblical masculinity.
Yeah, and he uses some kind of interesting metaphors right off the bat to kind of describe this, I guess you could say, foundation for biblical manhood. He's talking about like 2x4s and 16 penny nails, like he's building something, right?
Yeah, it definitely sets a tone of seriousness and permanence. He's not presenting this as like, some kind of fad or lifestyle choice, but like a foundational structure based on, what he sees as these timeless principles. And he actually borrows a framework from Weighty book, What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter. And it's this idea of the 4 P's of family shepherding. So it's priest, prophet, provider, and protector. And each of these P words represents like a distinct aspect of, a father's role, according to Pastor Pierson.
So it's a pretty clear roadmap that he's laying out.
Yeah.
So let's break it down, starting with priest. What does that look like, practically speaking?
Well, so Pierson really emphasizes this idea of spiritual leadership within the family. So that's, things like representing the family before God through prayer, leading family devotions, setting an example during communion at church, those kinds of things. And he even admits, he didn't grow up with like regular family worship, but he discovered its importance later in life, which I think makes his message a little bit more relatable, right? Because, not everybody comes from this background of, perfect biblical family life.
Yeah, it resonates with me too. It's not about being perfect, but just recognizing that need for spiritual growth and making faith an active part of your family life. Mm-hmm. So what about prophet? That sounds a little intimidating to me.
Yeah, it does sound a little intimidating, but Pierson kind of clarifies it as instructing the family in God's word. So it's like explaining biblical principles, being prepared to answer those tough questions that kids inevitably ask. He even mentions catechizing, which is essentially like systematic religious instruction. So, making sure that your children have a solid understanding of the faith.
So it's not just about having faith, but being able to really articulate it and explain it, almost like being, a theologian in your own home.
Exactly, yeah. And he stresses that, this takes work. He even compares memorizing scripture to, memorizing sports stats, just highlighting the importance of choosing what we fill our minds with, really being a reliable resource for your family. And he even quotes Proverbs 24:10 here, calling on the righteous to rescue those who are being taken away to death and to hold back those who are stumbling to slaughter. So, pretty powerful imagery there.
Yeah, that's a huge reminder of, I guess, the responsibility that comes with fatherhood, right? It's not just about protecting your family physically, but also guiding them spiritually. So provider. Now, that seems pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling Pastor Pierson goes a little deeper than just bringing home a paycheck, right?
Oh, absolutely. He goes way beyond just like material provision.
Yeah.
He really emphasizes stewardship of all of God's given resources. So, that's your time, your talents, even your family itself. And he actually even brings up responsible procreation here, acknowledging the blessings of large families, but also urging people to consider, their capacity to provide both materially and emotionally.
So there's an element of discernment there, making sure you're not just having kids, but you can truly, truly care for them.
Precisely. And this is actually where Pierson gets, quite passionate about laziness. He calls it idolatry and really highlights its destructive impact on families. And he actually distinguishes between being a busybody and busy at work, emphasizing like productive endeavors that benefit the family and the community. And he even links laziness to like negative behaviors like gossip, meddling, and even things like addiction.
So it's not just about working hard. It's about directing your efforts toward, what's truly valuable and being a good steward of your time and your energy.
Exactly. And that includes financial stewardship as well. He makes a really strong case for tithing, even when finances are tight, urging people to kind of examine their spending habits and prioritize giving as an act of faith. He even, this is interesting, he even quotes a line from a TV show. He says, "What does a man do? A man provides for his family. When you have children, you always have a family. They will always be your priority, your responsibility. And a man provides, and he does it even when he's not appreciated or respected or even loved. He simply bears up, and he does it because he's a man.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful statement. It really speaks to that unwavering commitment that's expected of a father, going beyond, feelings and circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads us to the final P, which is protector. And as you might imagine, this is quite a complex and interesting topic in Pierson's view.
Yeah, definitely seems like there's a lot to unpack there, and we will delve into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've gone through the priest, the prophet, and the provider aspects of Pierson's trad dad model, right? So now let's dive into that fourth P, protector. And Pierson makes it very clear this goes way beyond like just physical protection.
Yeah, he's really painting this picture of the protector as someone who's standing between his family and any kind of harm. It could be physical, emotional, even spiritual, right?
Yeah.
It's like a constant vigilance, being aware and ready to defend, those under your care.
Right, and he actually uses this really powerful analogy. He compares it to like a shepherd guarding his flock. He even references John 10, where Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd, laying down his life for the sheep. So, highlighting that self-sacrificial nature of this role.
And he gets very specific, especially when he talks about protecting families from, what he sees as negative cultural influences. He actually mentions drag queen story hours as something that, Christian families should guard against. And this seems to be where his worldview, that, very traditional conservative Christian perspective, really comes into play.
Definitely. He very much sees the world as this battleground between good and evil, right? And families are kind of on the front lines of this. He even calls it a war for the cosmos, and the home is like the command center. So fathers are called to be warriors, not just for their families, but for their faith as well.
And he's not advocating for passivity at all here. He's really emphasizing wisdom and discernment.
Yeah.
Not going out looking for trouble, but not running from it either. He actually quotes Proverbs 24.10 again here, that verse about rescuing those, being led to death. He uses it as a call to courage and action.
Right. And it's not just about physical threats, right? He talks about protecting children from, harmful online content, what they're exposed to in the media, being mindful of their friendships, just generally being aware of, the emotional and spiritual influences that they're encountering. It's about like proactively creating a safe haven in a world that he views as, increasingly hostile to their values.
But he also cautions against, I guess, potential pitfalls within this protector role too, right? Like he warns against letting it become an idol, consuming you to the point that you're neglecting other responsibilities. It's a reminder that, while physical preparedness, defense, that stuff is important, it shouldn't overshadow everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about finding that balance, being strong and capable, yes, but also being present and engaged in other aspects of family life. So, a warrior, but also a priest, prophet, and provider, all of these things kind of working together.
And it's interesting that he also cautions against neglecting the emotional and spiritual well-being of your family while you're focused on just, physical protection. It's like true protection has to encompass all aspects of a person's life.
Absolutely. And he seems particularly concerned about the influence of, even the church community itself. He urges listeners to be, discerning about who their families associate with within the church, guarding against, drama, negativity, those kinds of things.
And he wraps up the 4 Ps by really emphasizing how they all work together, right? Each one supporting and complementing the others. So it's like balance, integrity, and intentionality are key in all areas of family leadership. But he doesn't leave it all doom and gloom. He encourages men to actually embrace these roles joyfully, arguing that, when it's done with enthusiasm, with a cheerful heart, it becomes a source of delight rather than a burden.
Yeah, it's like your attitude as a leader is going to directly impact how your family responds. Right?
Yeah.
You lead with enthusiasm and they'll follow suit. You lead out of obligation and their response will be obligatory as well.
Yeah.
Leadership is about more than just, issuing commands. It's about inspiring, motivating the people that you're leading.
That makes a lot of sense. So he kind of shifts gears a bit here. He goes from the what of family shepherding, the 4 Ps, to the why. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And he argues that to properly lead our households, we have to understand their purpose. And he really dives into this whole concept of the household as God's ordained sphere of government. It's pretty interesting because he says it extends beyond just the immediate family. It includes things like, servants, extended family, property, inheritance, all of that.
It's a very structured view, very hierarchical. And he connects it back to, this biblical concept of economy. And he explains that that word literally translates to house law in the Greek.
It's fascinating how he just kind of weaves in these linguistic and historical insights to build his argument,
Yeah, he paints this picture of the Christian household as like a microcosm of God's created order. So, the husband representing Christ, the wife representing the church, and then the children, those who inherit the blessings of that union. It's a powerful analogy that really elevates the significance of the family unit in God's, grand design.
And then he connects that concept right back to that war for the cosmos idea that he brought up earlier. So the home isn't just a shelter from this war, it's a strategic command center, right? Christians are called to see their families not just as recipients of God's grace, but as active participants in his mission to redeem the world.
And he leans heavily on C.R. Wise's book here, The Household and the War for the Cosmos. He even quotes the book's description. He says, "Your household is not just a shelter from a war zone. It is the command center from where you launch your attacks."
So it's a pretty militant view, right? Like there's no neutrality in this war. You're either on God's side or you're aiding the enemy. And this choice plays out, in the family, the church, even the government, according to Pierson.
Right. And he really challenges the listener to think about, the greater purpose of raising a family. It's not just about raising, good kids. It's about raising warriors for Christ.
Yeah.
Equipping them to go out and fight for his kingdom.
Wow. So it's about preparing them to engage with the world and impact it for God's glory, not just keeping them safe and happy.
Exactly. And he uses this rather striking analogy. He actually describes children as like arrows being sent out to battle, weapons in the fight against evil. It really underscores his view that raising a family is a spiritual battle, requiring courage, determination, a willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah, and he even shares this personal anecdote about praying for his children every night. And, he says he's not just asking God to save them, but to use them to reconcile all things to himself. It's a very expansive view of parenthood, seeing children as part of something so much bigger than just the family unit.
Absolutely. And he concludes this section with a quote from his friend Andrew Sandlin, who says, "If you try to break God's physical cosmic laws like gravity and thermodynamics, you'll end up breaking yourself. If you try to break God's institutional cosmic laws for the household, you'll get the same result. How you manage your household will have a cosmic effect." So, a pretty stark reminder of the weightiness of our choices as parents and their lasting impact.
Wow. So we've covered the what and the why of family shepherding, according to Pastor Pierson, right? But his sermon doesn't stop there. He ends with this really powerful call to action. He's urging his listeners to reject apathy and embrace intentionality in all areas of life.
It's like understanding the purpose of the household isn't enough. You have to actually live out that purpose with purpose. Knowing what to do is only half the battle. The other half is being determined to do it and to do it well.
And this is where he introduces this whole concept of the desolation of disinterest. It's kind of a dramatic phrase, but he's saying apathy is a dragon that we have to slay in our hearts if we're going to shepherd our homes to the glory of God.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like a call to arms against complacency, right?
Yeah.
And he circles back to that word intentional, which he's used, throughout the sermon. He really emphasizes being purposeful, calculated, deliberate in all that we do. Contrasting that with just living haphazardly or aimlessly. He wants people to reject passivity and really take an active role in shaping their destinies.
And he's not afraid to call out laziness as the root of much of this apathy, this lack of intentionality. He's saying it's not just a personal failing, it's a sin. It has consequences, and it impacts not just the individual, but the family and the community as a whole.
And he draws this parallel between, God's purposeful actions in creating and sustaining the universe and the intentionality that he calls on us as humans to exhibit in our own lives. We are created in his image, after all.
Yeah, he brings up Psalm 138.8. He says, "The Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands." And he really emphasizes that phrase, the work of your hands, highlighting that, God accomplishes his plans through the work of his people.
Exactly. And to really drive home the dangers of apathy, the importance of this intentionality, he uses this really interesting analogy. He talks about Smaug, the dragon from, The Hobbit, who hoards all this treasure but does nothing with it.
Smaug the dragon. What does that have to do with being a trad dad?
Well, it's about wasted potential. Smog represents, those who are content to just exist, to accumulate wealth and resources without putting them to good use.
Ah, I see. I see where he's going with this. It's a call to action, right? Don't be like Smog, sitting on all the treasure that God has given you and just letting it go to waste through apathy and neglect.
Exactly. He wants us to ask ourselves, are we actively engaging with our responsibilities?
Hmm.
Are we using our resources wisely? Are we investing in the things that truly matter?
It's a really powerful image and definitely a thought-provoking way to conclude this section of the sermon.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how he brings it all together in his final remarks. That Smog thing, it really got me thinking. Like, we can have all the knowledge, all the resources, but if we don't actually do anything with them, what's the point, right?
Yeah, and he really drives that point home in his conclusion. He's urging people to be intentional in all that you do and to put your hands to the plow and get to work. It's not enough to just, agree with this idea of a trad dad. You have to actually live it out.
So it's less about the label and more about, really embracing that whole way of life.
Yeah.
A life of purpose, responsibility, and commitment to God and to family.
Exactly. And, he's laying out a pretty challenging vision, but it's one that he clearly believes in, right? Full of meaning and purpose. It's that call to step into, the fullness of what it means to be a man, a husband, a father, and to really live those roles with conviction and courage and faith.
Yeah, and he gives us a pretty specific picture of what that looks like, right? With those 4 Ps of family shepherding, the priest, the prophet, the provider, the protector.
Yeah, and throughout it all, that thread of intentionality just keeps coming up. Actively choosing to engage, not just drifting. It's a call to be, warriors, shepherds, leaders, and ultimately to reflect God's character in our homes and in the world.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. Pastor Pierson's sermon is, without a doubt, a call to action. It's a challenge to, really examine our priorities, commit to a life of purpose and intentionality. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up.
Yeah, I think so. It's a vision that's going to resonate with some, challenge others. It's going to start conversations about the roles we play in our families and, the legacy that we leave behind.
Absolutely. And we always want to leave you with something to ponder. So we'll leave you with this. How does Pastor Pierson's message resonate with your own understanding of fatherhood, of family, of purpose? What challenges you? What inspires you? We encourage you to keep thinking about it, keep talking about it. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.